And what a surprise I got. I asked if you would like for me to talk about guerrilla warfare and terrorism. And holy mackerel, everybody's hand came up. So I feel like I've been trapped. And so I think we need to get to it. I'm going to modify the standard agenda a little bit. And as you know, we stay very close to the agenda because you get used to it. You know what's coming next. But this time, it's a little bit different. We'll apply a little bit of guerrilla warfare here and take it off the top of the head. And the head don't work when you get to be my age. You forget a few things, like forgetting to brush your teeth, comb your hair, and things like that. So I think we need to start in on it, and I'm concerned about forgetting a few things, so I've got a whole big bunch of notes. If you're sitting down and thinking about it, you can remember them, but if you're not, you don't. I'm not an expert on either one of the subjects, but I have had some experience with them, as you can well imagine. And I think that the most important thing is that those two things are of major concern to us at the present time, especially the fact that we don't have any guerrilla warfare, but the two are related, or that you have terrorism and guerrillas, and there's really a shady area between the two of them. And so when you talk about one, you're talking about the other. And I want to make sure that you are able to understand that. So I'll refer to my notes a few times so that we get a full basket full of ideas. The first thing that I would like to do is define a little bit about each of them. Terror is a maximum effect with a minimum of effort. And we've seen this over and over again. When we wanted to talk about it, that we didn't know that we were going to have a problem down in California, but it sure happened. And it will continue as long as that type of warfare works. And some of the things that you need to know, it takes a minimum of effort to run terrorism and a guerrilla war. A few people that are dedicated, like we find in the Middle East, can do a lot of damage and do it quickly and at not much of an expense. You don't see tanks, you don't see airplanes, things like that on their side, but what you do see is the sneaky Pete that comes in and causes the problems in the target area. So I want to talk a little bit more about those. Flexibility is another thing. But on terrorism, it is very flexible. And so you need to think about it. Just because we happen to have one in California just before our last meeting, is not something that's always going to happen that way. You never know. It's like getting sick. You don't intend to, but you do. And that's the way that terrorism and also guerrilla warfare operate. So I think we need to understand that. Guerrilla warfare is slightly different, but as I said earlier, they are related to each other, and they work off from each other. In the guerrilla warfare, it takes an organized unit, but there's a couple principles. They are usually something with an organization that is limited in logistics. They have very little like the regular army does, or a regular force. For instance, they always apply guerrilla warfare to a weak point, as happens with a terrorist. You don't attack strength, you attack weakness. And we certainly see that occurring in the California incident. And so I think that we need to think a little bit about that. Also, we have a difference in the operations. A guerrilla operation will generally attack in a time of where you think that you're safe and you're not. As an example, and I'll talk about it later, but surprise is a very big thing that you have to remember about both of these. If you think you're safe, turn the page, you're not safe. And that's the way that both of these operate. So I want to talk a little bit about the thoughts on the operation of these. The maximum intelligence of the area and the timing is critical, and the defense is also critical. And they will never attack strength, and I want you to remember that, because when you take a look at the places that they have hit, they are all places that are weak, and so don't get yourself in that kind of a position. I want to talk a little bit about the path of resistance to both of these organizations, and I'll talk about it more when I get into the discussion on it. But I think that we all must and have to put in the back of our head that this is going to happen, and don't ever think that it's not, because it does and it will happen. So put that in the back of your head for a rainy day, and remember, how would you react? What would you do if your family is involved? How would you protect them? How would you protect your friends and neighbors? And those are things that you need to think about and understand. Let me first talk about the World War II. On a real rainy day, I remember in Oakland, Washington, when I turned 18, I went down to the draft board, and you couldn't enlist and you could volunteer for the draft. And went down to the draft board in Oakland and said, I want to go into the Army. I want to go be an infantryman. And the 4F guy that was there sort of looked at me kind of funny, and he said, do you have a mental problem? And I remember that one really well. And he also said, well, I've never had anybody volunteer for the infantry. That told me something. Must have been a good decision. And so I said, in 10 days, I'm going to be 18, and I'll be ready to go. And so he gave me some paperwork. Mama was not real happy about that, I can tell you. It was inevitable, it was going to happen anyway, so do it now or do it later. And so I did it now, and that's how come I got into the Army. Beat the draft. Sounds like our Secretary of State, doesn't it? To save time, I was assigned to the 27th Infantry, and that was on Saipan. One night, everybody thought that the war was winding down on Saipan, very quiet. I want to talk a little bit about Saipan, because a lot of people don't know much about it. It's volcanic, and it's just like Swiss cheese. You could find a cave, you could find a hole, any place that you want to go. And the Japanese stay behind realized that. And one night we got an attack with everybody thought the war was just about finished as far as Saipan is concerned. And it was just like a bolt of lightning hit. The machine gun and rifle fire, and boy, it was quite a surprise. Typical of a guerrilla event. These were stay-behind Japanese, supposed to be a couple hundred of them there on the island, and the places that they were hiding was in that Swiss cheese that I was telling you about earlier, and they did a good job of it. But anyway, we didn't take any casualties, and we never found any casualties on the other side. So I guess everybody got free on that one. But it was an interesting event. That was my first exposure to guerrilla warfare. It was not a large coordinated attack. It was a very small group. I don't imagine that there was much more than a reinforced squad. and that would put you up about 15 men maybe. But that gives you some idea of the flexibility of that type of operation. I think that also next come Okinawa after Saipan. That had no guerrilla war in it. It had a lot of guerrillas, but no guerrilla war or no other type of war. It was a grinding meat grinder is exactly what it was. Our unit took a lot of casualties, and all the units did. But fortunately, I made it. Never touched a hair on me. And for somebody in the machine gun squad, that is luck. Just plain luck is all it is. It's not skill or anything else. You just happen to be at the right place at the right time. So that was very interesting, Okinawa. Then from Okinawa, we moved to Cebu in the Philippines. It's in the Visayan group, right next to Leyte. And the reason that the Army secured Cebu in the first place is it had the only civilian dry dock at Cebu City. And that's the interesting one. Of course, the one in Manila was a military, that was a Navy dry dock. But there was about 2,000 stay-behind on that. And they were supposed to be controlled by the Filipino constabulary. And I'm sure you've probably heard about the constabulary in the Philippines. The thing that always amazed me was one of those people in the constabulary carried a BAR on his shoulder. He's about 5 feet tall, and the butt of the BAR was almost dragging on the ground. I'm sure that it weighed more than both of their legs, but it was an interesting one because our mission was to get ready for the invasion of Japan. But we reinforced the constabulary when they got into trouble, which was frequent. There was supposed to be around 3,000 stay-behind on the island of Cebu. And these people have no logistics backup or anything, so they had only what they had. And they were very limited, and they controlled the central part of the island. But they would forage out of there for supplies, whatever they could steal or get or anything like that. So they were very active. And I would consider that that really was a guerrilla war more than anything else. They made no attacks against us. They did attack the constabulary at will. They were well organized, and they were a force to be reckoned with, but they never hit our regiment or anybody that I know of in the division. I think that that was probably a good thing to prepare for the invasion of Japan. If that would have occurred, I would not be here talking to you today. There's no question in my mind about it. When we did go into Japan, as you know, we went in peacefully. But if you looked at the organization that they had when we left, for instance, we landed at Otaru on Hokkaido, and when we marched from the ship down to the capital of the province, the Japanese soldiers were all lined up on each side of the road we were marching on with their backs to us. And I wondered why in the world was all of them standing there at parade rest with their firearms empty and with their back to it. That was part of their culture, and that was what they did. That was peace. They don't want to fight anymore. And so that was an interesting part of it. And I remember that we had the responsibility of controlling an ordnance, and it was a huge ordnance on Hokkaido. It probably occupied 40 to 50 acres. There was every kind of firearm that you could get at that ordnance. And why? Because it was beyond the range of the B-29s, and the only strike that they had on Hokkaido was from aircraft carriers, and that was almost nothing. But there was a tremendous military effort there by the occupation force to stay separate from the Japanese, no association whatsoever, and then that began to deteriorate as time went on, and so we left there, and I moved down to the division, deactivated, and I moved down to the 11th Airborne Division, and that's where I got the parachute business. And stayed there with them for a good many years. Now, I think we've covered World War II. All right, let's talk about Korea. In 1950, I was the Regimental Sergeant Major of the 187th Parachute Infantry Regiment. King of the Hill. Soon as the war was declared, I got notice, you are called to active duty, Second Lieutenant Roberts, at the bottom of the hill. What a demotion that was. Interesting, but you may wonder why that I jumped from the enlisted grades to the commission grades. Not enough time to talk about it, but I'll talk about it later sometime. It's interesting, and I think that it may share some light on your thoughts and so on, how we got there. So that gives you a pretty good rundown on the World War II. Now let's talk about Korea, since I was a sergeant major and demoted to a second lieutenant platoon leader. Infantry platoon leader. Boy, you talk about a dangerous job. The way you tell how much a fight was cost you is that you pay attention to the platoons. How many platoon leaders did you lose? How many squad leaders did you lose? If you lost a lot, it was a tough fight. If you lost any, it was a walk in the sun. So that gives you some idea of what happens to platoon leaders. They get promoted to captains if they survive. So that's the way that goes. I think that also I should talk about to you on some of the other operations that happened in the World War II part and the Korean part. In Korea, our first mission was to secure the Kimpel Peninsula. All of you probably know where the Kimpel airfield's at, and that's where we were supposed to clear that. Why? Because the 10th Corps was moving up to the north, and the whole left flank was exposed, so we had the responsibility of keeping that open. That was also good training, because we had a lot of people that come in that were unaccustomed to things that we were World War II veterans were used to. I remember an incident as we were marching up the approach march, by the way. Approach march is where that you don't know where the enemy is, so you're well prepared and you move along. You've got scouts out, you've got the point, and then you've got the main body behind that. And we happen to have the point. When I say we, I'm talking about the platoon, the company that I was in, and the platoon that I had was the point. And we come around sort of a mass of hills. We had a straight stretch, and it had a turn in it, and there, sitting right at that turn, was a hill, looked like a chocolate drop sitting there. And the brain kit clicked. If there's an enemy, he's on that hill. And that, the old hair began to stand up on the back of the neck. And sure enough, when we got strung out along that straight stretch, there was a bullet popped and pop, pop. You could hear them coming down, right down the road. There was an outpost sitting on that hill, and that was the first contact that we really had with any of the Korean, North Korean forces. And they would probably stay behind. They got out of the area because they know we were going to be hooking around them and coming in on their flank, and they got out of there. But that was the first contact. The thing that impressed me the most is when that first bullet popped over our head, I turned around and looked down the column, and it looked like an animation. Everybody just peeling off the road into the ditches on each side. If you heard the bullet go by, forget about it. It's already gone. But they did, and that's typical of new troops. They'll do it every time. But you can't blame them. I felt like getting down to myself. Of course, as a platoon leader, you got to stand up there, you know, and say, Roosevelt charge, you know, that's the way it goes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the guerrilla warfare in Korea. The central part of Korea, as you know, is a very mountainous, rough area. The main force was the 10th Corps going up the west coast, and then on the east coast was the whole Korean ROK Army, ROK, Republic of Korea Army, were on that. And they went by that center area. What would you do if you were in a defeated army? You would get in that area, it's the only safe area. So it was full of units. And there would be squads, platoons, company. If we hit a battalion a couple of times, they would just take that area, that would be their base. And they would infiltrate people back to the north, is what they would do. So that was real interesting. And I think that we put in probably 2 months cleaning that central area up. And that was all guerrilla warfare. Opposing them was the constabulary, the Korean constabulary. Let me go back a little bit. The Korean army was based on the constabulary. That was what was there before the war started. So they still had some constabulary units that were active. So they put them in that particular area. What was the constabulary? Very poorly trained bunch of bandits is what they were. They stole everything that they need. And they alienated the Korean civilians that were in the area. Someday I'll talk about a couple of operations with them. You might be amazed that how ineffective they were. But that is another part of the Korean campaign that never gets any press. Who wants to know about somebody who marched 20 miles and didn't see anybody, and then immediately gets into a firefight? It don't make good press, so that's probably why that it wasn't covered. Then I think that the biggest thing that I noticed about that operation was we had the regiment minus on the east of us, and we were a battalion task force that landed at where our objective was. One of the things that we were supposed to do in that was capture a prisoner train. The other thing we were supposed to do was to keep the Koreans from moving north and reforming. They did it anyway, but that was our mission. But the thing that I think most of you may even know about was the fact that one of the projects that we were supposed to do was block and capture all that we could. We did that. Our platoon captured 35 live North Koreans. We wounded 2 and killed 3. And so that was a walk in the sun, really. Those events I could talk to you about sometime, but I don't want to go into detail now. Then, as we were relieved by the 1st Cavalry Division and the 9th ROK Division, and again, what a ROK means, Republic of Korea Division. And so we had to pass through them as we were marching over to join the regiment, because we were a battalion task force, they were a regimental task force. So we go to them. And I think that as we were marching in that direction into 9th Division area, I seen a field off to my left or right front. And I thought, what in the world is that? It looked like a bunch of people laying down on the ground, resting, or else they were sleeping. I didn't know what they were doing. As we began to come up on them, and when I say come up on them, right to that far from them, I noticed that they were all shot right in the back of the head. And there was probably between 100 and 150 in that field. There was the 35 prisoners that we had taken, and we had turned it over to the 9th Division. Plus old men and old women and even children. Now, that will make an impression on you. And that has always impressed me. When we were going, I'm sure glad I wasn't a Korean soldier that showed himself for an hour or two, because he would have certainly been snapped by the unit if I didn't do it myself. But there is something that you can think about. You never seen that in the press? No. I never seen it in the press. I never even heard about it. But it sure happened. And so those things are things that you don't really forget, you remember. And then we went on over, joined the regiment, and then we took on some more responsibilities. I think I should probably talk about the fact that we also had a job cleaning up that central area and replacing the constabulary that was there, because they were more problems than they were help. And so I think that the higher commanders realized that and moved us into a position. And that's a very interesting position that I would like to talk to you someday when we have time. Now we're out of Korea, and let's talk about Vietnam. That, to me, was nothing but a plain guerrilla war, and it just continued and continued. And terrorism, remember all the news that come, I think Mama sent me a couple of clippings where some hotel was bombed in Saigon. That was going on all over the place. So you had the problem of terrorism, and in addition to that, you had a guerrilla war going on. And when I say a guerrilla war, they had been, that is the VC. One thing you should remember, that the VC come from the Viet Minh. Any of you remember the Viet Minh? They beat the French. That was the Viet Minh. What Viet Minh stands for in Vietnamese is people freedom. That's the literal transfer. Viet people. Yeah, and so that's the way that you would transfer that. They were a tough, well-trained organization, anywhere that you met them. And I was assigned to Vinh Long province, and that, by the way, is the biggest province in the country. It had 11 districts and special zones. And what a special zone is, if you have an area that is a tough nut and you don't have the strength to take it, it becomes a special zone. You isolate it. We had what we called the Y, and that connected the Mekong River to the north of us with the Bossack River to the south. You never hear about the Bossack River. No. It makes the Mississippi look like a child in size. But what happens is that the Mekong splits right at the Cambodian border, and Vinh Long was right in on that island. We controlled the ferry that went to the north, we controlled the ferry that went to the south. But what really impressed me is the guerrilla warfare action. We had the second biggest airstrip in Vinh Long, and the VC were very interested in that. Anytime that you come in, you better hold your breath, because you'll hear a snap go by the hot chopper, or one of them went right up through the floor. Now, if you don't think that'll get your attention, it does. And what that was done by was a band of VC guerrillas, about a platoon. I wish I'd have had a battalion or a regiment with the motivation that that unit had. Finally, to control them, I got a hold of a platoon of M24 tanks. Anybody know what they were? That was a light tank. It had a 76mm gun on it, and we put 2 and 2, and they were all interrelated. And of course, they had 2 machine guns on them. They had the turret machine gun and then the flexible on the top of it. That pretty well cut it down, but it still happened. And so that gives you some idea how effective the VC guerrillas were. And if they took a notion to take an outpost, they would open it up just like a can of beans. And they did that. I remember one of the major attacks that we had was over in Chola district, which is across the Mekong River. Why did they assign us a district across the river? Because the whole area was controlled by the VC. And that was the only exit that they had, was across to us, and we to them. So there was a lot of gerrymandering of boundaries and so on involved. But that gives you some idea of what the effect of that was. Now that ended. In fact, I was there for 18 months when I was evacuated out of the area with every disease that you could get in the tropics. And where did they ship me? Right to Madigan, right here. Mama was the first white woman I think I've seen. And she's still here. So I think that was an interesting move. But boy, you talk about sick. I had maybe dysentery. I had yellow jaundice. I had everything that you could possibly have because at that time, we, as an advisor, see, I wasn't in a regular unit. I was the advisor to the military in that province. So you lived with the Vietnamese. What they ate, you ate. And they had all kinds of lobster, and boy, do I like lobster. Interesting thing, in a sidebar on that. The lobster come in, see the delta, and I'll pass this map around for you to see it. We always said that on the wet season, it was 1 meter below sea level. And at the dry season, it was at sea level. And when I pass that map out, you'll get a good idea there. Now let me get this map out. This is an operational map. By the way, this is my third map. The first map I wore out. The second map, I got a bullet hole right through the middle of it. Talk about luck. That's not skill, that's just stupid luck. And so I had a chest of drawers in the mag house where I would put whatever I wanted there, and I put that map, and this is a sidebar, but I think it'll be interesting to you. I put that map up on the top of that chest of drawers and forgot about it for a couple of days because we were busy. And then one day I thought, well, I'll get that and put it in my keep stuff. And it's gone. Somebody had lifted it. And so in a conversation with the province chief, I told him, God damn it, one of your people stole my map. And he said, oh yeah, the map, your map, yeah. Oh, that's okay. If you could have a piece of property of somebody had good luck or was whatever it may be, a good thing, you could steal something from him and it would transfer it to you. And so I think the housekeeper got the map. Now while I'm talking about that, I want to talk about another incident that is related to it. We were moving the battalion plus attached troops down a main route to an area that we were going to talk about. That was a Vietnamese planned operation. Anytime they planned an operation, the VC knew it, probably within minutes.
Right.
And so we've got the regiment moving down the road, and boom, there's a column goes black up in the air, and it looked like an umbrella raising up, and then it come right down. They had planted a mine under the road. They knew we were there, and fortunately they hit a gap between units, and the casualties was very light. But they blew the road completely out. And then I thought, my gosh, you know, that road just lifted up and then set right back down again. Maybe we can get across it. So I beat it on up to where the mine had been detonated, and it was just kind of a little dip. I thought, oh boy, we can knock that road down and continue with the operation. And to make sure of that, I walked out into that concave area. And the deputy for the province handled the military operations. He said, don't go, don't go, don't go. And that means no. And so waved his hand in front of me and said, I'm going to go down there and look at that and see if we can't fix it. I walked out into the middle of that, and it's only about 2 or 3 feet below the original bed. So all we got to do is cut the shoulders off and we got a road. And pow, there was, it felt like dust. It had gone in my eyes. And you talk about a bang, that was a bang. There was a bullet hit the brim of my cap. And it took about 1/4 of an inch off from it. Now that's pure luck, not skill. Just nothing but luck. Well, I was kind of proud of that hat because it was about an inch and a half missing where the bullet had gone by. And so again, I put it on the chest of drawers. A couple of days later, it's gone. Now I know why that they stole my hat. It would bring good luck to whoever the person was. But that country was full of things like that. And being an advisor, you were not with an American unit, you were with a Vietnamese unit. You ate what they ate, you drank what they drank. No wonder I had every disease that you could possibly get. So that's about my experience in guerrilla wars. And then, of course, I was assigned to the Pentagon, and what did I do? I get a letter from the Department of State Department, and they say, because of your experience and your capability to speak the language, we want you to go to Vietnam working for the State Department. And what I would be doing would be the same thing that I was doing as a military, but I would be a civilian. And the first thing I did was call the Department of the Army, the Field Grade Officers Personnel Office, and say, what's going on here? Okay, we concurred in the Department of the State request because this. And so that's where it comes from. And I said, okay, the Department of the Army says it's okay, I'll do it. So I go ahead and say yes to the Department of State, and they sent me up to Washington, D.C., and you know what Washington, D.C. is. I don't have to tell you about that. Sent me there for a briefing. It was garbage. They didn't even know anything about the country. They didn't know anything about the people. But they were going to pacify all of them. Those positions that were held by the military that I talked to you about there had all become civilian positions. In-country briefing was even worse. They said you got to wear civilian clothes, no military clothes whatsoever. You can't carry a firearm, no firearm whatsoever. Well, you know what I told them about the clothing. First thing I got was a flight jacket. They had flight jackets then. They had just come into the country. And so I got a flak jacket. I wore that in the big pockets of my early book. What do you suppose was there? Hand grenades. I'm sure nobody knew it but me, but there they were. And underneath that was a pistol. And so I put that whole tour in well armed, I'll tell you that, because I had to. And the State Department says, this is the only way we can pacify these people. Tell them and show them that we are here for peace. What garbage. Look at the State Department chief we got now. God, anybody in the military that you talk to will tell you what a dud this guy is. He got 3 Purple Hearts. If you had 3 Purple Hearts, you could be sent back to the States. These Purple Hearts were rigged, no question about it. And one of them was probably an accident. The story I got was that he fired a 20 millimeter on the boat, and it hit the bank. They had explosive ammunition there, tracer, everything. And it come out, a piece come back and hit him. So he wounded himself. That's the only one that I have some pretty positive proof of. But those were the kind of people that you were associated with. It was a miserable tour. Then come the Tet Offensive. And the night that the Tet Offensive opened up, we only had a battalion of VC in that province, where Vinlong was big. And we only had a few compared to what Vinlong had. But anyway, they decided that they were going to open up the jail and release all the prisoners. They took the jail, and it was done in a couple of minutes. I think the first round went off. I was up in the tower, and I could look, not at a sharp angle, but an angle, and you could see tracers coming up all over that place. They knew exactly how to do it. That was a guerrilla force, and they had studied that jail, and they opened it just like a can of beans. Nothing to it, and gone. They got 40 prisoners. Every one of them turned into an enemy soldier because he joined the VC. Was free. But that gives you some idea of how the VC operated. They always had a good reconnaissance of whatever they were going to do. They had people who knew people inside, and that was the system. On an operation, I don't think we ever had a successful Vietnamese operation, because the VC were always waiting for you. They knew you were there. They would booby trap it, they would mine it, no matter what it was, they would do it. And being a guerrilla unit, they were able to do it. So we need to think about that and hope that these terrorists that we have now don't turn into a well-trained command like the VC units were. So I think that gives you a pretty good rundown on what we had. And what I would like to do is go to the comment and question period and take the administrative part out. In the interest of time, because boy, wow, 40 minutes has gone by. I think I could talk. And so I would like to go to the floor to get any comments or question you have. You're on.
Does that sissy that we have in the White House, is he the final word on how Americans fight? Because my rationale tells me if we fought them the same way they're fighting us, we'd be a hell of a lot better off.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
So
that's an easy question to answer.
Does he does have to say on how we fight them?
Pardon?
The Obama, this thing in the White House.
Oh,
Commander.
Yeah, well, let me talk
Commander
about that.
Nothing, right.
Talk a little bit about that. They're putting airstrikes in on the enemy. They don't know for sure what's there when they make an airstrike. We tried by controlling, I mentioned the Y earlier. That was a hard VC center. So what I wanted to do with it is make it a free bomb zone. You'll be surprised how many Navy aircraft in particular that have a mission, they're loaded for that mission, and something happens, they don't go. So they're loaded with bombs or whatever it is, rockets, but they can't land on the aircraft carrier carrying those weapons. So they want to dump them. They dump them in the ocean. I said, whoa, don't dump them in the ocean, dump them on the VC and the Y.
Yeah, that's right.
And they did. But the VC were still there, despite all that bombing so does that answer your question? It don't work.
No, essentially my question was, does Obama have the final say on how we fight?
Yes, Obama is the commander-in-chief of all armed forces.
So if he wants our troops to carry squirt guns, we carry squirt guns, right? No, I said, so if he wants our troops to carry squirt guns, then we carry squirt guns?
No, we don't.
No.
That's like me not being armed on my second tour.
Exactly.
Speaking of guerrilla warfare, what do we do in January of 17 if Obama has decided it's too much fun being president to give it up, and he has been firing the generals that don't agree with him politically, so we can't count on the Army. And I'm sure he's been cleaning the Secret Service to get people who agree with him politically, so we can't count on them. What do we do?
What you're saying is that he declares a national emergency.
Yeah, he will declare a national emergency, and he'll say it's too severe to change presidents in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And what do we do? And I've thought for years that was a very real possibility, and the more I hear and see, the more I think it is a real possibility.
Well, I think maybe you may be right that is what his plan is, and it could be. But if that occurs, I think that you're going to have another civil war.
Yes.
And the soldiers in the Civil War will be the people who are sitting right here today.
We can always give them a one-way ticket to Kenya. Yeah.
In anything.
That's why he wants to
But what you're saying is a possibility, yes, I agree with that. But I don't think it possibly could happen.
I don't think so.
My name's Karen. As far as our communities are going, as far as our communities are concerned, I heard something on the TV last week. After the, excuse me? Oh, I heard something on TV last week after the San Bernardino incident that the neighbor didn't say something. So the question on TV was, it's always see something, say something.
Yeah.
So the question is see what and say what. So I'm wondering if as communities here on the peninsula, we can have some kind of a standard way to look at it, like not just everybody sort of making up their own minds, but how do you call the police? What do you say? What are you looking for? What's the macro level of what you're looking for when you're seeing something? Is it late night, car trips coming in and out? Is it somebody wearing something or saying something? So I'm wondering if there's a way to standardize.
How do you
it.
profile?
Carrying plumbing in the middle of the night.
Things like that.
How do you profile?
That's a tough one. I know what I would do.
What would you do? Whoops, you run in front of my bullet?
Pardon?
Whoops, you run in front of my bullet?
Dang, I thought this was for 5 times.
What would you do?
Boy, that's a tough question to answer.
I always like to get to the essence of something.
Yes.
Because that's where the hard decisions are, when you really boil it down.
Everything's pushing to be politically correct anymore, and that's a little garbage.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Okay, I'll talk to you on that later.
You figure it out.
Don, back to Vietnam. What kind of guerrilla bombs or explosives did the VC use or build? These guys down here in San Bernardino were using a galvanized pipe bomb, a simple device. And I'm just wondering, they were very effective, the VC. What did they use?
Yeah, well, the VC did everything. One of their, that road that I told you about that they had blown out, they had tunneled in on the side of that, and they used fertilizer and diesel oil. And that's the reason that I've seen that umbrella raise up, because it's a very slow explosive. TNT is 27,000 feet per second. That's a shearing effect. The fertilizer, we were supplying them with fertilizer. We were supplying them with diesel fuel. They had the makings of any bomb that they wanted. And it is a very low, as I said before, so it has a lifting effect to it. And that is why that type of a mine works. So I got to tell you a sidebar on that. Boy, I'll get you right to it. On my sidebar is a little bit interesting to you, and since you raised the question of mines, we were running an operation and we had a reserve battalion. You've heard me say many times, always have as a reserve. And if you don't believe it, you better, because it's a fact. But anyway, what happened is that the battalion commander of that battalion shut his radio off because he didn't want to hear us say, you take your battalion around and you attack from Peninsula. That was a common thing among the Vietnamese professional soldiers. And so, boy, I was up in arms. I get in my Jeep, take off down the road to where he's at, and I get in his face, and I didn't threaten his life, but I come awful close to it. And suddenly he come on the radio. He was able to talk. So the commander goes ahead and told him what to do. And now I drove on that road with no security whatsoever down to where he was at, probably 2 to 3 miles. And then when I come back, we hit a straight stretch with plenty of rice paddies on all sides, and suddenly, boy, the Jeep was up on its nose like this going down the road like that. And there was a mine in the road, and I had gone over the top of it the first time. I don't know, and maybe he wasn't ready to fire it. But boy, he was ready the second time, and it blew all the antennas off my radios.
So you had no radio?
Yeah, so I had no radio. But it was interesting is it stood us up right on the nose. I had the Vietnamese driver, he's going on touch me. And it blew the windshield out. So any hard objects, that slow velocity affected it, but like a human body, it didn't. It felt like somebody had thrown a bucket of ice water on it, is what it felt like. And so what that was a shock wave. But I'm glad you raised that question. Fertilizer and diesel oil, that'll work. That's all you need. But, you know, to set that off, you can't do it with a regular fuse. You have to have a minor explosion, like a hand grenade, was detonated. So it's easy to do, to make it.
I think that's what they used in Oklahoma.
Yes.
The Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Okay, somebody had a question over here. There.
If you had on an expended ordnance that Dutch, they used the Dutch, they would rework them and use that as back on top of us. For instance, you put a 750 in and it doesn't go off, they'll cut it open and they'll take the baritol off. We also dropped CBU. If the CBU got, like CBU-1, if it got hung up in the weeds by the trees, they could pull that out and use that as a, you know, with a tripwire. So
Use your own stuff.
they're pretty smart people.
Okay. Your particular question was what?
I wasn't a question, I was contributing.
Yeah, you were just making a statement.
Thank you.
All right, any more things from the floor? Yeah.
Yeah, one more. How many of you have seen the signs in Squim that say we're expecting 3,400 new residents? Anybody seen that?
Yeah.
Well, if you haven't, we got 3 or 4 of them, and they're big signs, they're about 4 foot. My question is, how the hell did they know a year ago, and they've been up for over a year, how the hell did they know a year ago they're going to get 3,400 Syrians?
Oh,
Lord.
don't start rumors.
My wife said, don't start rumors, no worse than Mars. And I think Ed Butter might try that, but if he did, it would be Congress's responsibility, I think, to impeach him immediately. And I think they probably could do that with the way the Congress is set up right now.
But if they'll do it, that's
Okay, anything more?
I think that the big event which will tell us that this is going to happen would be if Obama issues a presidential order saying all civilians must give up their weapons, guns.
Come my door.
I don't plan on giving mine up, even if he does, but some people will. But the point is, if he does that, I will have to believe that that's exactly what he has in mind.
You happen to hit on my next point. How many of you have a concealed weapons permit? Boy, that's great. Because what I was going to say, if you don't have one, get one. Because that is your only insurance that you have.
If you have a firearm of any sort and you're not a member of the National Rifle Association, shame on you. Join up, it's the only voice that we've got in that regard.
Yeah.
And donate.
Yep. Now,
And donate.
I can't impress on you as much as I'd like to be armed. Now, let me give you an example. The president of Vietnam was coming down to make a bunch of awards at Vietnam province. The province chief said, I know you carry a weapon all the time, but you must not, because we want to show him how pacified we are. And I just about did something to that. But when he said that, I had already had a slugger stick being made. It had a Russian Type 43 for a blade. And you just turned it and it was out. And so he didn't know that when I attended the meeting on the reviewing stand with the so-called president of Vietnam that I was armed. So I think all of you should be armed. If you don't have a arms permit, a concealed weapons permit, get one. That's the best insurance you could get.
That's right.
I know this is a sad commentary, but I have some pastor friends here in town that carry firearms when they're in service, church services. And I think that's a damn shame that it's come to this.
But churches aren't exempt from terrorism.
Yeah.
I did a survey of the police departments in Clallam County to find out how many concealed carry permits had been issued in the last 5 years, since they last 5 years. And I found that approximately one person out of every 9 in this county has a concealed carry permit. And the number that I used to divide into was total population. So that means that probably of the adults in the county, it's about 1 out of 5. I think I totally agree with Don. We ought to all be armed, and if there's any order that comes out that says your concealed carry permit's no longer any good, ignore it.
That's right.
You know, the VA is a good example. They have those big signs up, no firearms, no knives. That in a school is probably the most dangerous place you could possibly be in. And what you're talking about is just that. I would say if you don't have a concealed permit, get one. And it's easy to do. They jacked the price up, but it's good for 2 years.
Five.
Comment back.
Yeah, I have a question. When I was asked that question, when I was a candidate, I was asked, what would you do as a school board? What would you do to protect the kids? And I said I thought that we should have an armed guard on campus. I still am going to have to find out. I know we have a security officer. I haven't yet met, we haven't talked about that at all. That's one of the questions. And that, I think maybe that would go into a private session, an executive session to discuss that. But what I'm wondering is, would we have public support if I were to try to accomplish something like that, or at least bring that up, would there be public support at school board meetings for that? Because without the support, it would go nowhere. But I'm just wondering if people would be willing to come to support that. Because it seems to me that's the only solution. I actually I raised that question with one of the guys that works at Freedom Foundation, and he said he didn't know that was actually that. I was a little surprised, because he said he didn't know if that was actually, that made us a target. In other words, he didn't see that maybe it was that much of an issue, but I think it is. And so I'm just wondering, would the support be there? How many people would be willing to come to a board meeting and support that? And I'm also wondering, I've been looking into what the NRA has a program, and I've been looking at what some of the school boards have done across the country, and some of them actually teachers are training now to be armed and what to do in an emergency. So if they would approve of that, would there be, do you think, a possibility of having volunteers, and it would be a whole security issue, and you'd have to have them trained and make sure they were prepared for something like that. But would we get volunteers, if we could arrange for something like that, to actually help at the schools, so that we would have somebody to do that, besides paying somebody, because paying somebody would also be an issue, I suppose. They would say, if you're going to have an armed guard at every school, that's going to be a cost. So I'm wondering if there's any way that something like that could be arranged, where we would have people willing to be volunteers at schools for that sort of protection.
The short answer is yes to all of that.
You think so? There'd be people in the community who would volunteer to work in schools.
Do you want to ask the
Yeah, I just wondered if people, if we...
audience for show of hands?
Yeah, or something like that. If we could get, if we think we could get volunteers to help at schools for that sort of thing. So, okay, yeah, could we see a show of hands? Or how many of you think you know someone who would volunteer? And could we see a show of hands for that?
Most of us here are probably just a little bit over the age of wrestling somebody around in school.
Right.
So we have to be somebody a little younger.
That's what I'm wondering, but you think, would you know someone, or that's
Or someplace like the high school would require two of it, kids are so stretched out.
Yeah. So, yeah.
You proposed a thing, and put the notification out, training's involved, and you'd have tons of volunteers.
You think there would be?
With one adult, probably out of 5 in this county having concealed carry permit, you better believe some of them are teachers.
I hope so.
Absolutely.
But
the thing of it is, the state of Washington says you cannot carry a gun to school.
Well, that's the other thing that I would like to pursue. I don't know how far we go. I have actually mentioned it to some of the guys at Speaker Foundation. If they know legislators who would put, a piece of legislation up to pass that, but he said probably wouldn't get through the legislature.
Susan, why wouldn't you send a questionnaire to the parents and why wouldn't you send a survey?
Questionnaire?
A survey.
Yeah, that's another idea
to the parents, because you have a far greater impact with the people that have children at that school.
I thought about that.
Well, I think the answer to your question is a survey to see what the feeling of the general republic or the general population is. If you ask this group, you're going to get one way or the other side. I think that the idea of a survey would be great. And that would give you the facts that you need to know.
Yeah, well, if we got that far, then maybe we would need to support it at a board meeting.
Okay. Anything else from the floor? Jerry, you had something you wanted to cover.
For the sake of time, if you have no objection, I can probably elaborate at a different meeting. I think Don is alluding to and asking me what additional information I had, or what our history has. And it reflects back to the Spanish-American War, the Philippine insurrection, and then after that period of time, we had the battle in the Philippines, the Moros, M-O-R-O-S. That particular war took place from 1903 to 1911. Anyways, what is interesting, I won't go into detail on it, but there was a lot of deaths involved for the jihad and the guerrilla warfare that took place after the Philippine insurrection. So anyways, at another time, I can go into it, Don.
I think you raise a good point, where there is support, like that revolution that was that you're talking about. The people that make up that guerrilla force were as dedicated as anybody could possibly be. And that was a major war as far as the U.S. Army is concerned in the Philippines. And the Visayan group, where Cebu was at, is the central area of the Philippines, where what Jerry is talking about is the southern part of it. And that's real interesting. That war still goes on, although it's under control. So guerrilla warfare can be controlled. So thank you for the input on that. I wanted to pass these maps around. This first one, anybody have the hands up on anything? The first one is Vinlong province. What I want you to look at is the fact that if you look at the blue on this, that stands for water. And you're going to find that there's a tremendous amount of water there. And when I said that there was the wet season, you were a meter under sea level, and the dry season, you're at sea level, you'll realize what I'm talking about. So I'll start this one around this way. Now let me talk about Col. This is a much newer map and a little bit easier to read, but that's a tactical map. Let's start that around, let people take a look at it and see what happens. Those two maps didn't get stolen.
I would like to thank Colonel Roberts for his service to country in 3 different wars, plus his service today in sharing his experiences with us.
Be interesting to you, but I'm glad it is.
Oh, it's fascinating.
And you're just getting the crust. You're not getting down to the cake. For instance, one of the things that I thought I'd mention if we had time was, how come I jumped from enlisted man to commission? I didn't go to any school, or anything like that, or any college. And I would talk to you on that sometime if we have the time and if you might be interested, because you may know some young buck or lady, whichever it is, who wants to go into the military, and I would like to share that with you. And so if some of you want that, you can ask me individually, or we can do it as a piece of the meeting.
I think I can speak for everybody here to say that we're just very happy that you were lucky.
Don, did you go through OCS?
No. I went to no schools or no battlefield position.
Yeah. Don, I don't think it was luck. I think the old man was watching out for you.
Yeah.
Well, for instance, on Okinawa, enforce what he said. Look, I was talking to one of the guys that I was a squad leader in the 1st Machine Gun Squad in Foxton. The hottest place you could be, I think. And I was talking face to face to him, and all of a sudden he said, oh, you know what he said. He bent and he's holding his arm. And I thought, what in the world happened to you, Murph? Oh, he said, my arm's broke. Yeah. And then I realized that I'd heard that snap, and it was a stray bullet, and it hit him in the arm. And boy, that's luck, you know, to be standing alongside someone. That's why I call it luck. The next thing was in Korea, and it was midnight, but a bright moonlight, and there was snow on the ground. I'm talking to the H Company, which was the machine gun platoon leader, and we're going to attack the hill out there about 500 or 600 yards in the morning when it began to get daylight. And I'm standing there talking to him, and what they were doing was firing harassing fire on us, long-range harassing fire. And there was a couple bullets coming in, whack on the tree, thump, they hit the ground. And I turned around to say something to him, and he isn't there. And I looked down on the ground, and there he is. And he was dead. I mean, dead as he could be. And so in the moonlight, you can't see well. Blood looks like black. You can't really see it. So we buckled him up and took him down to the aid station. We had a couple wounded. It was down at the aid station. And I went down with him, with the body, and put a flashlight, and the bullet had hit him in the corner of the eye.
Oh, dear.
And so it just sheared the, what do they call it, in the back of the head. We had a doctor here.
Spinal cord?
The spinal cord. And killed him instantly. Now, that is pure luck.
Yeah.
So that's why I use the term saying it's luck. That you remember things like that for some reason, I don't know why.
I do.
Okay, anything else from the floor?
Current events?
Pardon?
Any current events from the floor? Current events?
Current events.
What's going on?
Events? You mean next meeting?
No? I mean, what's happening?
What's happening now?
On the national level,
Judy?
How about in our city? We have some comments on the city, what's going on with the city.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
George, are there any comments regarding the city and what's been happening in the city?
What's going on? Current events.
Okay,
Good news.
I have none.
Yeah, Judy does.
You have some, okay?
I'm Judy Hangardner, and I just wanted to make everybody aware of what's taken place in our constitutional republic here.
Louder.
There was a vote that was, a motion that was put on the table regarding the fluoride issue. And this is not about the fluoride issue. What this is about is what the motion that was put on the table to, from Sherry Kidd and seconded by Dan Gase, that there were 9,000 ballots that were sent out regarding this poll. 4,000 came back. 2,004 no fluoride and 1,004 fluoride. Sherry said that since all the ballots or the polls did not come back, that she felt that we need to count those ballots or polls that were not returned as a yes vote for fluoride.
Baloney.
And so I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of what she's done and what Dan Gase has done in this community. This is appalling.
what else would you expect from Sherry
I
Kidd?
think this is the wrong format for that
This is
discussion.
not the wrong
And
format, sir.
everybody is in concrete.
This
in the
doesn't
way
have
they
to do,
think.
this
The
doesn't have to do
vocal
with
minority
what,
is
the
spoken.
results. This, sir, this does
Let's-
not have to
let's
do
drop
with
it.
the results.
Good time to
No,
listen.
people need to be aware of our republic here. And our vote did not count, or our voice did not count. So you just need to be aware of that.
The voices of the shrill minority will speak up, and the silent majority, unfortunately, is very silent, and that's very destructive. That's self-destructive.
Well, I disagree with that.
If they didn't return the ballot, doesn't that mean that they weren't interested in this?
That's correct.
Exactly,
That's
but Cherry
correct.
Kid and the Mafia Medical, Mafia Dental decided that it was, they were just, well, let me put it this way. A lobbyist lobbied every one of the people in the city council. Now, Nobody says they got anything, but I'm asking you, what is the purpose of a lobbyist?
You think that the medical community supports fluoride?
No, they want to go, yeah, they want to get in there, you know why?
You
They told us,
think they do it for nefarious reasons?
oh, absolutely. They told us that if we did not keep the fluoride in the water, there would be no more doctors coming to town.
Oh,
Yeah, that's in the paper.
That's not just me, read the papers, they were there, I was present, heard the whole thing.
And they were doing it for the good of the people too.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, that is very true.
They're doing it for the good of the people.
Damn right.
And when they say they're gonna take your guns away for the good of the people, you're gonna say that's good?
No, they're wrong.
Well, it's the same.
well, same principle,
It's the same
same one
principle.
way you believe
Same
it.
principle.
No, you all are relying on research that is bogus as hell.
Hey, it doesn't have anything to do with the research, sir. It has to do with our rights.
Your rights, I understand
I
that.
do not want fluoride put in my drinking water.
Do you drink fluoridated water?
No,
Were your kids ever vaccinated?
yes.
Why? That's
That's-
Because they couldn't go to school unless they
Yeah,
were.
that was totally different. We're in a whole different.
No, it's the same principle.
Not when
Well,
they put
and-
mercury and everything
and-
else in the vaccinations. No.
Are you willing to support the health care and dental care of all the children in this community that suffer for the lack of the fluoride?
Are
Because
you willing
fluoride
to
is a very
explain to me
efficient
why
method of
all of
decreasing.
the
Are you
different?
supposed to, a topical?
No, topical's not worth crap.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, that's what they used to do to us when we were children.
I understand that.
Okay.
The whole thing about fluoride.
Every one of the smile surveys from 2005 have been proven to be bogus. In
Everybody
fact, we have the records showing that there's more cavities in Forks than they had prior to
Okay.
fluoridation.
What percent of the population in Forks drinks fluoridated water?
All of them.
No, that's not true. How many
Okay,
people
probably
are-
by
how many people are on wells out there? What percentage of the population is on wells? If you want to count all the kids in the school,
They
you have
don't
to-
count out all the kids, they take a certain amount of children from each school.
no, you have to,
But they don't. The test only allows for maybe 20 from this school, 20 from this school, and they try to get them so they can track them, follow them all the way through. Not 100% of the children, but any town. God forbid.
it was 100% in the initial research on fluoride.
Regardless why, and the people have already spoken.
Yeah, that's the point. The people have spoken, they don't want it, and yet they're saying it doesn't matter what the people want. That's the whole point.
That's the issue.
Yeah,
I understand.
$10,000.
I do
That's the
understand. No,
point.
I do
Your tax
understand that
dollars
issue.
were
That's a
You know,
different
do
issue.
you drink fluoride, the fluoride water?
I happen to be on a well, so no, I don't.
Okay, so then you have no voice in the opinion of us that do drink the water.
Does Eloise Kaling drink the fluoride water?
It doesn't
No, she
make any
doesn't.
difference.
No, she does
It's
not.
about- This
She
is not
has no
about
business
Dr.
being out there.
Ellis.
Oh, no, that's not true.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we don't want to get in an argument
Yeah,
with
no,
ourselves.
and so,
What we need to do is get the facts, and we have the facts in the vote. The
correct,
vote of the people
Correct.
dominates everything.
That's right.
And we have that, and so anything that we have to say in either side of this is already decided.
correct.
So we either accept it or we go someplace else. And I don't want to see you guys go someplace else. To me, the vote is number one. Always has been and it will always be. You can have your private opinions. I have mine. And I welcome yours, whatever it may be. And all we're hearing now is those opinions.
Right.
But what we must do is look at that vote.
That's right.
Any questions on that? Okay. Anything more from the floor?
I wrote a letter to the Port of Call, and I talked to him by Wilson, Dale Wilson, by email, and I put a pro-fluoridation letter in there, and he said he believed in freedom of speech and said he'd put it in there. Well, he put it online, but he did not put it in the paper where he said it is. Both papers had their prejudice. When I write a letter, Paul Gottlieb, the pencil neck with the thug, gets online with me, and he, throws my stuff out. So you have prejudice in our local paper in the education and what goes in that paper. Now, Dr. Eloise Kalin put a hell of a lot of stuff that's just misinformation in there. And a leader should be able to sort out the misinformation. Now, I don't expect the general public to do that. The fluoridation issue was great in that both sides spoke, and apparently the people voting against it were more participating in the process, and they're the shrill vocal minority, and it's a lesson to the silent majority that you need to speak up for what's right, or it's going to go south on you.
And let's drop it. He said drop it. Everything's closed. That's drop it. Let's move on.
Well, we want to hear from professionals. We got a doctor, we got a dentist. And I think whatever they have to say is their opinion, and they certainly can say their opinion, and that's what we're here for. So you can vote the way you want to, but the vote has been made.
All I'm saying is our votes should count. They should not be thrown out. The votes should count.
Under no conditions do you ignore the vote of the people. I don't care who or what you are.
Amen.
Amen. That's it.
That's our point.
That's the whole point that I was trying to make.
Anything else?
Well, just a couple other things. They spent over $10,000 doing that mail out on the vote. The people who were pro-fluoride spent a lot of money on their media. The people who were doing anti-fluoride also spent some money, but not as much. But these were just donations from small people. Look at all that wasted money. If they were going into this with the thought that they were never going to do the vote and never take the vote and be serious about it, they should have never done it. You're losing your freedoms, you're losing liberties. You got to pay attention to the vote, and that's what we want you to talk about.
Okay. Is there any more comments? No. All right, the next meeting is scheduled for 16 January 2016. How about that?
Merry Christmas.
Well, the fact that we don't have any guerrilla warfare, but the two are related, or that you have terrorism and guerrillas, and there's really a shady area between the two of them. And so when you talk about one, you're talking about the other. And I want to make sure that you are able to understand that. So I'll refer to my notes a few times so that we get a full basket full of ideas. The first thing that I would like to do is define a little bit about each of them. Terror is a maximum effect with a minimum of effort. And we've seen this over and over again. When we wanted to talk about it, that we didn't know that we were going to have a problem down in California, but it sure happened. And it will continue as long as that type of warfare works. And some of the things that you need to know, it takes a minimum of effort to run terrorism and a guerrilla war. A few people that are dedicated, like we find in the Middle East, can do a lot of damage and do it quickly and at not much of an expense. You don't see tanks, you don't see airplanes, things like that on their side, but what you do see is the sneaky Pete that comes in and causes the problems in the target area. So I'm going to talk a little bit more. We have a difference in the operations. A guerrilla operation will generally attack in a time of where you think that you're safe and you're not. As an example, and I'll talk about it later, but surprise is a very big thing that you have to remember about both of these. If you think you're safe, turn the page, you're not safe. And that's the way that both of these operate. So I want to talk a little bit about the thoughts on the operation of these. The maximum intelligence of the area, And the timing is critical, and the defense is also critical. And they will never attack strength, and I want you to remember that. Because when you take a look at the places that they have hit, they are all places that are weak. And so don't get yourself in that kind of a position. I want to talk a little bit about the path of resistance to both of these organizations, and I'll talk about it more when I get into the discussion on it. But I think that we all must and have to put in the back of those. Flexibility is another thing. But on terrorism, it is very flexible. And so you need to think about it. Just because we happen to have one in California just before our last meeting, is not something that's always going to happen that way. You never know. It's like getting sick. You don't intend to, but you do. And that's the way that terrorism and also guerrilla warfare operate. So I think we need to understand that. Guerrilla warfare is slightly different, but as I said earlier, they are related to each other, and they work off from each other. In the guerrilla warfare, it takes an organized unit, but there's a couple principles. They are usually something of an organization that is limited in logistics. They have very little like the regular army does, or a regular force. For instance, they always apply guerrilla warfare to a weak point, as happens with terrorism. You don't attack strength, you attack weakness. And we certainly see that occurring in the California incident. And so I think that we need to think a little bit about that. Also, of our head that this is going to happen. And don't ever think that it's not, because it does, and it will happen. So put that in the back of your head for a rainy day, and remember, how would you react? What would you do if your family is involved? How would you protect them? How would you protect your friends and neighbors? And those are things that you need to think about and understand. Let me first talk about the World War II. On a real rainy day, I remember in Oakland, Washington, when I turned 18, I went down to the draft board, and you couldn't enlist then, you could volunteer for the draft. Went down to the draft board in Oakland and said, I want to go into the Army, I want to go be an infantryman. And the 4F guy that was there sort of looked at me kind of funny, and he said, do you have a mental problem? And I remember that one really well. And he also said, well, I've never had anybody volunteer for the infantry. That told me something. Must have been a good decision. And so I said, in 10 days, I'm going to be 18, and I'll be ready to go. And so he gave me some paperwork. Mama was not real happy about that, I can tell you. It was inevitable, it was going to happen anyway, so do it now or do it later. And what a surprise I got. I asked if you would like for me to talk about guerrilla warfare and terrorism. And holy mackerel, everybody's hanging on. So I feel like I've been trapped. And so I think we need to get to it. I'm going to modify the standard agenda a little bit. And as you know, we stay very close to the agenda because you get used to it. You know what's coming next. But this time, it's a little bit different. We'll apply a little bit of guerrilla warfare here and take it off the top of the head. And the head don't work when you get to be my age. you forget a few things, like forgetting to brush your teeth, comb your hair, and things like that. So-
Then I will close the door.
So I think we need to start getting on it, and I'm concerned about forgetting a few things, so I've got a whole big bunch of notes. If you're sitting down and thinking about it, you can remember them, but if you're not, you don't. I'm not an expert on either one of the subjects, but I have had some experience with them, as you can well imagine. And I think that the most important thing is that those two things are of major concern to us at the present time, especially the